And when Jesus left this world, it wasn't his intention at all for us to carry measures. And so in John chapter 1 verse 16, he said of his fullness. He was the fullness. Now he said of his fullness have we all received. Of his fullness have we all received from grace to grace. So as we journey from one level of grace to grace, what we are doing is the business of the fullness. What we are doing is to attain the fullness of the stature. That's why Ephesians 4:11, he said, "Is to some he gave to be apostles, to some he gave to be prophets, to some he gave to be evangelists, to some he gave to be pastors and teachers for the equipping." That means we needed to be trained to come into experiential manifestation of the fullness of God that is in our spirit. So the job of the apostle is not to heal the sick. The job of the apostle is not to prophesy prosperity. He will do that because there are still people growing. But the job of the apostle is to mentor the believer into the fullness. Because if you get into the fullness, sickness does not exist there. If you get into the fullness, poverty does not exist there. It said to mentor. The word is katatismos. It means to equip you with light until you become a custodian and a manifesto of the fullness of God. That's why I said, henceforth, not being tossed to and fro by every wind of doctrine, but we will come into the fullness of the measure of the stature of Christ. So when you find a believer should be a replica of Jesus. If you find a believer that you can distinguish between him and Christ, he has not come into the fullness. The idea behind the fullness is to mass express God. So when you come to church, you find God sitting. When you go to the market, you find custodians carrying dimensions of God walking on the street. This is why Christianity is not another religion. We respect all the religions of the world, but this is divinity expressed through humanity. This is mortality swallowed up by immortality. And so when we look at you, Paul said, henceforth know we no man after the flesh. When I see you, I want to see the first dimension of Christ that radiates. Please, let's sit. Yeah. God is not looking for preachers. He's not looking for singers. He's looking for witnesses. Because a witness is a custodian. When he shows up, he reveals God. He can reveal God through singing. He can reveal God through preaching. He can even reveal God through drawing. But anything he does, he emits God like a radiating agent. He emits God to a world. Because our world is full of darkness, they are looking for God. God is the cure of the affliction of this age. And so the era to brag with a title is over. The era to brag with a gift is over. The era to brag with a car is over. When you show up, they find out, what constituency of the spirit are you coming from? What dimension of God do you carry? Are you of the order of light? Are you of the order of the glory? Are you of the order? Because that's what the world is seeking. The ministry of the last day is the ministry of the fullness. That when men walk, it will be an army of Christ walking. When we enter a city, it's an army of Christ walking. And when you touch us, you know you've touched God. That's why Paul said, be ye followers of me, even as I'm the follower of Christ. If you see me, you've seen him. John said, as he is. Who talks like that? He knows where he's talking from. Because there's a reality that mortality must be swallowed up by immortality. There is a place humanity must get to where they become vital custodians of immortal dimensions. That when you talk to men and touch men, you touch God. One of the most troubling stories I heard in my life was the fact that India today is not a Christian nation because of Christians. Mahatma Gandhi was in South Africa. They spoke to him about Jesus. He was so fascinated and he wanted to know Jesus. And so he thought the natural thing to do, or the best way to get to know Jesus, is not just to read a book, but to find out those who have met him and see what they look like. Because at the end of the day, that's what he will also look like. And when he came into the gathering of the saints, he was segregated. And he said, if I have not seen you, I would have believed you're Jesus. We must produce Bible, but there are no witnesses. The first witness is a man who has touched God. And so in the ministry of the fullness, our goal and our focus is to become the host of God. Because this is the burden of God from ages past. After he created the world, he needed to be a participator of the world he has created. But he was too big for the world. And so there was no dwelling place for him. In Isaiah 66 from verse 1, he said, where is the house that you have made for me? He said, heaven is my throne. The earth is my footstool. But where is the house that you have prepared for me? And Paul came through spiritual technocracy. He said in 1 Corinthians chapter 6 verse 19, he said, you are the house of God. You are the tabernacle of God. You are the host of God. You are the answer to the question God has been asking for ages past. And so every time you want to find the fullness of God, you are supposed to come look for believers. And then we ask you, which of his dimension are you looking for? Is it his power? Is it his excellence? Is it his wisdom? Is it his authority? Is it his glory? We buffet him. We are a buffet of God. Because when you enter the glory, you will discover. See, the reason God created you the way he did was not because he wanted to be creative. The reason he created you the way you are is because every part of you represents something in the glory. The hand of God is power. That's why I say lay hands on the sick. Your hand is a symbol of power. God's hair is his purity and his agelessness. So when we talk immortality, that's why when men grow old, their hair becomes white. Because when you see God, his hair is white. He speaks of purity and agelessness. God's face is his presence. He speaks of his government. That's why when you look at a man, if he's wrong, he knows. Your judgment is communicated through your sight. God's feet is his reign. That's why it's anywhere you step to, I've given to you as a possession. Because his reign is in his feet. He shall put his enemies at his footstool. And he said, where the soles of your feet shall step to, I have given to you. You are a reflector of the glory. But you need to understand the technology of hosting and manifesting God. Because the whole idea behind the fullness is to host him and to express him. Some of us, we've represented and manifested where we came from for too long. When you speak, in fact, you take pride in the fact that you are from the eastern part of Nigeria. We are wise people. They know they cheat us. That's a falling level of life. I'm from the west. We are educated. Every compound there's a professor trained by mundane people. Whereas there are lecturers in light. There are elders in the spirit that don't only teach but transfer reality. Paul was bragging like that he was a Pharisee of Pharisees, bragging with mundane knowledge, until a time came he said, I knew a man many years ago. Whether he was in the flesh or in the spirit, I can't tell. But that man was carried to the third heaven. He knew a place that was superior to all the lecture rooms he entered on it. That bragging ended. A generation that brags with suit, brags with where they've gone to. I was in the UK yesterday. Really? Do you know that while you are saying you were in the UK yesterday, somebody is still standing in the presence of God? I was in the UK when men are saying, before God whom I stand. And they became so immortally relevant. Did you not read about Elijah? Only Elijah lived in this world 4 times. God was looking for a way of reproducing Elijah. because he lives in the presence. The Bible said Elijah the Tishbite, we didn't know how he came. He came from nowhere and he went back to nowhere. Elijah the Tishbite, who was of the inhabitants of Gilead, came to the king and said, before God whom I stand. And after Elijah was carried to heaven, we thought his story was over. And then a voice was heard in the wilderness, and he said, he shall come in the spirit and in the power of Elijah. And we thought that was over. Jesus was on the Mount of Transfiguration, and then Elijah came again and began to tell him what he will do in Jerusalem. As if that was not over, he said, there are two witnesses who are still coming. Elijah will come again. One man is so relevant that God has to bring him to the earth again and again and again. And we are bragging that we went to the United States. Is it not the Bible that said, hear this, it is appointed to man to die once, then judgment? How come this Elijah, it looks as if he has become indispensable in the economy of God? I thought God is called the I am that I am. He depends on no one to be God. How come Elijah's dispensation can't finish? But Elijah finished one lifetime. God said, no, if you don't go back to earth, there will be trouble. We give you another lifetime. And he comes and executes a project and goes back. God said, you will still go back. What kind of man is that? Those are carriers of the fullness of God. There's something they know. They are immortally and eternally relevant. No wonder God could not afford to put his body in debt, because God will need to use him many times. Because God knew he was going to use him many times, he refused for him to die. Because if this body decays, I need you again. I need you. If you finish now, there will be problem in the world. And every time Elijah came, if he didn't come, there will be crisis on the earth. Because if he didn't come to announce the coming of Jesus, there will be no savior. If he didn't come to tell Jesus what to do in Jerusalem, there will be no cross.